Aloha, I'm your Huckleberry.
Americans, the how and the why of our beloved republic are so much better known and understood than the who. The United States of America was born in 1776, but it was conceived 169 years before that. The earliest settlers had watered the New World with much sweat. They had built substantial holdings for themselves, for their families. And when the time came to separate themselves from a tyranny an ocean away, at best it meant starting all over again after the ravages of war. Researching what you're about to hear gave a whole new dimension to my reverence for our nation's first citizens. All others of the world's revolutions, before and since, were initiated by men who had nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Our founders had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except one thing.
Isn't that propaganda? Other revolutionaries had nothing to lose, but ours the greatest. Polemics at its best.
Hello, Americans. I'm Paul Harvey. You remember the cherry tree fiction. A long time after you have forgotten the more earth-shaking history-making episodes in the life of George Washington. You have misplaced in your memory the details of Ben Franklin's statesmanship, but you remember his flying a kite. Joyce Kilmer was a great military hero. But the only thing you personally recall about him is his poetic tribute to trees. Maybe of this current decade, that which will be remembered best will not be its wars and its moon rockets or its crumbling frontiers or the giants who lived and died. Maybe all that'll survive to linger in the day-by-day vocabulary of generations yet unborn may be the songs of a Memphis minstrel or the reincarnation of electric automobiles.
Oh, the prophet, Paul Harvey. The reincarnation of automobile. So this isn't him speaking in June of 2023. He died in 2009. So is that Bush giving him that award?
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them.
A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government.
Laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes.
And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states.
To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good.
He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable only to tyrants.
He has called together legislative bodies to places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures.
He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people.
He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
He has endeavored to...
He loves his mama. My ankles just hurt when I see her. Bates. So it's interesting to see these actors. Some of them have the script in front of them, and it seems like some of them are well prepared. Old school versus new school. So as you heard that, and I sped it up, as you heard it sped up, it sounds a little bit negative. And so my fundamental thesis is the original versus the copy removed one important paragraph. Slavery. That was the failure of this country. It started at the beginning. Thomas Jefferson knew this is what was wrong with this nation. Nephi explains that that's a caveat. And they compromise, and then a long time later they have a civil war to kind of deal with it. If Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin had any power, this would have been the thing. The North was worried about the power. That's why they put Washington in his position, is he was close to the South. So Virginia, and then you had the Carolinas and Georgia that were the two, I believe, that were opposed to this paragraph. So the other day I did some plagiarism analysis. I thought I would compare linguistically the original from the copy. And so I'm going to just go through that. The original challenged slavery. The copy ignored slavery. And slavery only appears once in one of the documents. So when I looked at my text, when I did the previous one, if the word wasn't in both documents, I removed it, which is something you can do in natural language processing. It's a decision you can make. But this time, I kept it in. And by keeping in fewer words, you're going to actually get a lower cosine similarity score likely. So my word cloud isn't working again. So let's go to the stemmed versions. State people time free. Cosine similarity very high. Obviously, it's the same document. So when I did this merge, I add all X, all Y, and that'll create some NAs, and I set the NAs equal to 0. And so basically, if it was in one document but not the other, it gets a count of 0, which you can see here near the end. So we have zeros. So that's going to reduce its cosine similarity because we included more things that are unalike. So I believe this is the raw count, not the summarized count. And we have so many one-word things that we get so much noise here. So power. Power to the people. Power to state government and law. The original is power to the people, liberty. What's interesting is the word abolish appears like 3 times in the copy. So they're talking about abolishing something, but not abolishing slavery. So it's built in to the collective of whoever helped write that draft. They knew how important abolish was. It was part of their mental mind. Abolish is the opposite of liberty. So the word abolish appeared in the copy, not the original. Power to the people. So I believe this dimension, this primary dimension, is about power. And remember, positive and negative is just the nature of PCA. So this dimension is about power. As you go left or right, it's about power. As you go up or down, this is the difference of the angle between these two vectors. Down is power to the people, liberty. Look at these other words that correlate with that. Blood. Going up is states' rights, right? It's right there. States' rights. And we know that with our understanding of what was going on. I believe states' rights are important, but states' rights were tied to this hidden variable of abolish slavery. And it's abolish, but it's not slavery. It's abolish other things. So it was top of mind. Oh, they want us to abolish slavery. Hell no, states' rights. So that message came through in the copy. And I'm a strong believer in layered government with electoral processes because that prevents the degree of corruption that can happen. I'm also a believer that at the fundamental level, at the town level, you have people getting their power and their liberty. And I'm also a believer that the power of the people should be mostly at the local level. As you go up, there should be less power. And that's how federalism started. Federalism, there was no power. The federal government had no money. And then after World War II, let's create an amendment and take income tax. The Declaration of Independence was about 0.5% of tax, I believe. Think about how much tax we pay everywhere. Property tax, sales tax, income tax. We do not live in a land of the free. We are enslaved. It's just a different master. And Thomas Jefferson was enslaved to that master. George Washington was enslaved to that master. Nephi talks about being enslaved to the master of debt. And he talks about a land of milk and honey where you can procure wine without money. Work we must, but lunch is free. If we had an economy not built on scarcity, but on abundance, we have more than enough resources to feed each other and live comfortably and just go to the park every day and read every day. But that's not the powers that be. The powers that be include bankers that want to get rich. So one of the things I've thought about is, this is when the Fed happened. This is when the Titanic happened to sink, and the men on the Titanic that were against the Fed just happened to die. That's odd. My belief is this was the beginning of the year of tribulation. Oh, wait, in Daniel it says it's 3.5 years. Okay, maybe it's 3.5 days. Maybe they changed the numbers. What Daniel says is there's a season and a time of tribulation. That is the vector of truth. Did they change the numbers? Maybe, maybe not. The idea of seeking truth, oh, the Bible's perfect. It's never been altered. It's obviously been altered, but God is perfect. These alterations are clues for us. And then I believe 1973 was the beginning of the year of desolation. Roe v. Wade. What just happened in the news? There's going to be some turmoil because of that. Notice the difference in those two times. 1973 minus 1913. That would be a 60-year cycle. That would be a great year. In the Chinese, that's a big year. I don't think it's a great year. 600 years might be a great year. And again, I'm speaking from physics, so maybe the Titanic sunk in 1912, and you're going to argue that you're wrong because you're off by 10 minutes. You got to think in a blurred bag of words fashion. Oh, there's the Water Ox again. 1913, the House of Romanov celebrates a 300th anniversary. If you can't see a link to that in 60 and 600, interesting. The Romanov family. When did the Romanov family die? Oh, there it is. 1913, federal income tax. Oh, the Dalai Lama declares independence. Mexican Revolution. An assassination. Joseph Stalin is arrested by the Russian secret police. Imagine if he hadn't come into power. How many Russians he killed. I like Lenin. I like what Lenin stood for. I don't know that I liked Stalin. A British steamship disappears in the Sea of Marmara on March 1st. Interesting. So obviously there's a bunch of things that are going to lead to the First World War. A British freighter carrying 343 tons of dynamite. That's a math number for those math people out there. The Ides of March. King George of Greece is assassinated after 50 years on the throne. Someone recently assassinated this former prime minister of Japan, a good man. The flood of Dayton, Ohio on March 25th. Oh, here's the other failure of our system. Direct election of senators. Senators had to work their local state senates in order to get placed in D.C. It was a level of electoral bureaucracy which reduces their power. If they don't stay connected to their state legislatures and senators, they don't go to D.C. Aldi is founded. Interesting. April 10th. Adolf Hitler moves from Vienna to Munich. The Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller Center. Romania declares war on Bulgaria. Death Valley hits 134 degrees. The town of San Javier, Uruguay, is founded by Russian settlers. The Russians and the Germans that went to South America, they went at this time before the fascists and all of the bad stuff was going sideways. There's some claims that they went and hid in the jungles after, and very well could have been. Some claim that in Cordoba, I think it's Cordoba, Hitler died in his sleep like 50 years later. They were running U-boats throughout the world. They knew about an island off of Brazil that the Americans were trying to turn into an Air Force base. They knew that route south. The Ford Motor Company first assembly line. Someone tries to steal the Mona Lisa. Oh my goodness. Allows the city of San Francisco to dam Hatch Valley. Yosemite's such a beautiful place. I didn't realize it got dammed as well. Richard Nixon was born. Who's that? No idea who that is. So, you're wrong. The Titanic wasn't in 1913. When was the Titanic? Oh, I was off by a year. You were off by a year. Your theory is so destroyed. What's the deal with all these Argentines? Okay, let's go to 1973. This idea of cycles, of pendulum swinging. I'm pretty sure 1973 was a water ox. The Sears Tower, a great secretariat, the record of all records. We got Richard Nixon again. Watergate. Bernstein was such a great reporter. Okay. Or it was always fake news. When he comes out of retirement to go on a show with a woman named Mika and Joe, you have to wonder how good he actually was at what he did. Or was he just part of the propaganda machine? If you think about the Nixon thing, the result of the Nixon thing was we had a president of the United States, Ford, that was never elected. And the moment Nixon got elected, they had put this in the works. Does that sound familiar? The moment he got elected, They first went after Agnew. They got Agnew out, and then they got him out, and then they could put in. And who is they? They has always been the bankers. Bankers make money on war. Who funded the Nazis and the Germans? The Herbert Walker family? No, that can't be right. Who gave the punch cards to the Germans to monitor their killing fields at Auschwitz? IBM. Oh, that can't be right. Wow, Secretariat. Skylab, the United States' first space station, was launched. Uh-oh. Nixon's talking to the Russians. We're going to get him out. Brezhnev. A coup d'etat in Uruguay. The CIA existed at this time. I was going to say, did the CIA exist yet? Or was it just a different name for the same tamale? The Watergate scandal. This Roe versus Wade, I've thought a lot about. Some of this other stuff I'm just learning about. The Yom Kippur War begins. Oh, there it is. Agnew resigns. Interesting. Guinea-Bissau, West Africa. Is this the IRA? Oh, look. Acting Attorney General Robert Bork, who later gets borked. Did we have an Attorney General that came in? Barr. It's all a game. Bork was doing his job to oust this one president so he would get a chip in the game later. So this Barr guy was probably thinking he was going to become a justice of the Supreme Court. I've heard this Barr guy give talks. He's a good Catholic. So sometimes I may be too cynical, but I don't know that I am. No one wanted that job. All of a sudden he steps up and wants the job. We got another Papadopoulos in a different scenario. Gerald Ford is now the vice president. Not elected. And then all of a sudden he won't be president. Was Roe versus Wade not president? Apparently that wasn't important enough to put on the 1973 page. We live in a world of lies. We live in a world of lies. The abomination of desolation is spoke of by Daniel. There's a lot of desolation words. Overspray with abomination he shall make desolate. Is that what I'm thinking of? "70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem." Cut that in half. Make that 35 years. Maybe Jerusalem was destroyed when Yeshua died. There was an earthquake. It rent the temple. There was an earthquake in 31 AD. So we have these times, and evangelicals love fixating to these times to build their endgame eschatology. Eschatology in Spanish literally means I think this is the one, that maketh desolate. He says it twice. He gives us the number of days. Okay? He does. And those days may be clues from God. The abomination detestable thing. — 9/11. The abomination of desolation. So this is to be stunned, to make desolated, stupefied. I'm not seeing. And I've always kind of. So one of the definitions tied to being laid waste is to deflower. So up here somewhere, oh, there it is. To be deflowered. Roe versus Wade gave the federal government power over the woman's body. And if you go back to what we're talking about with states' rights, so this one, you can see that the graph, people in power are in a different place. But again, these factors are directional. One could be times -1 or +1. The original is power to the people, liberty to the people. The copy is about states' rights, government, colonies, establish, abolish. Now, this states' rights, they wanted to hold on to their slavery. Should the federal government have the power to tell a person what to do with their body? And currently they do, because they have all the power. They hold the purse strings. You don't change the speed limit, the states don't get the money from the federal government for roads. So because there's such a power shift in the economics, the federal government has power. When the country in its bastard form was founded, the federal government had no power. It really did not have any power. The power was with the states. And I believe that's how it should be. Maybe you shouldn't have a United States. Maybe you should have a Texas and a Montana and a Florida. So this has always been my anchor. Roe versus Wade, the year of desolation. The year of tribulation. Wars and rumors of war. There's still war going on today. What we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that. It's a different kind of war. It's removing a lot of people from the war because of the high technologies. People are still dying. Don't get me wrong. And it's still wrong. And it's desolating. It's deflowering. I personally believe a woman has rights to her own body. I really do. And, abortion. What's the little blue pill? What's the IED or UIED or whatever you call it? What's a condom? Remember, teach ye diligently. Boyd Kays said if you're masturbating and you spill it on the ground or just spill it anywhere, you're committing murder. I don't know if he said that. Maybe Mark E. Peterson. I like Boyd K. I've always liked Boyd K. So I'm going to say Mark E. Peterson said it. So my cognitive dissonance won't kick in. From a spiritual point of view, when a man's phallus releases oil, that's semen in Hebrew, into the well of a woman. Remember in Isaiah, the hole of the well is where a child comes from. Child comes from. Just think about it. The well of a woman has claimed regardless of these obstacles. So even if he's wearing a condom, if in the space of time and place, his phallus is inside the well and the semen go into the well, whether or not there's a condom or whatever else, he has claimed her. Now, I'm not saying he owns her. He's just made a claim to her. She has her agency, always will, always can. So the idea of agency, look up above. Mormons abort children all the time. Do they wear condoms or little blue pills or IUD? Of course they do. In Joseph's day, so Joseph Smith was doing this plural marriage thing, and there weren't a lot of pregnancies. So some people are claiming there was some herbal thing they were taking as an abortive process. Fanny Alger got pregnant, and I think in what I think was going on, she didn't keep her clock, and that's why she got pregnant. So what they were doing was not to impregnate and fill the earth. What they were doing was get power from procreation. And she goes to Indiana. She quickly marries a man. We don't know if that child survives. The idea of sticking which is the 1973 metaphor, sticking a metal coat hanger into a woman's private area, into her well, to stab a child so it will die, that's slaying a child, right? And this is the problem with sin. There's 50 Shades of Grey. So Fanny Alger, 2 years later, Joseph has to go in front of a disciplinary court, I guess. Fanny Alger's uncle is on the court. Joseph says what he did was not adultery. He said it was not marriage. It was something related to ancient, and I'm going to put Nicolaitan practices. And this is Fanny Alger's uncle. And Joseph must have been some kind of persuader. But the point is, just like the Catholics, the Mormons have this information and are hiding it. This is what Nephi is talking about churches. This is what churches do. The great and abominable church hides information, burns books, and so on. This is what they do. Joseph, you want to start church? Knock yourself out. You're going to learn Nephi taught about churches with their lips say they want me, but their hearts are far from me. This is what churches do. So I'm still thinking about, well, what did Nephi say that there's actually the Church of the Lamb of God or the Church of the Son of God, and there are few in number. The other thing about Mormons, priesthood is eternal, but your calling as a missionary lasts 2 years, or unless we take your priesthood. Asinine. Just a little bit of logic, please. Priesthood is eternal, or it's not. Let me give you a word. Noam. Doesn't that mean eternal? There is no caveat to God's eternal ways. Oh, but you can lose your favor with God. Of course you can lose your favor with God. But if God puts his hands on your head and gives you a power and says to you it's eternal, he's not going to take it away. If you ask for a piece of bread, he's not going to give you a stone. The nature of God is good. Praise to God, the Almighty in heaven. He's full of goodness and grace. So Joseph was doing something to engage in power. And I believe it involves a spoon for a man and a butter knife, not sharp, for a woman. And it's about exchanging life force. For a man, that's his oil, his semen. For a woman, what do women like to do that men don't really care much about? And that's saliva. Water from the well. It's just a different hole. Don't get your holes confused. So in the Kama Sutra, it says that right when a woman has a duty, she can't be a peacock. Meaning, if she's making sounds that's getting her man to release his oil too soon, that's on her. But in the Kama Sutra says when a woman is orgasm, she's supposed to grab her man and spit in his mouth, kiss him. She's supposed to give her water at the moment of procreative maximum to the man. In South American Indian tribes, there are these pictures of these women sitting around a pot all day and chew on some leaf. Let's say it's yerba mate or cacao or whatever. They put it in a pot and boil it. As a community, they're practicing a form of PG-related polyandry. This is definitely PG. It's PG-13 because they're technically naked. So that's probably rated R by aversion, but they're Garden of Eden naked. They're innocent naked. So what they're doing is they're giving their water. They're not at the moment of orgasm, I don't think. I don't think they're in public mutually masturbating around a pot and boiling it. And so what they're doing is they're spitting into a pot and sharing that spit with all of the tribe. Anyone that eats of whatever that is. I believe the Kama Sutra is 380. Kama Sutra. Uh-oh. This is on inspired text. What are you talking about? The Songs of Solomon are probably some of the most inspired texts we have because it's probably an encryption. Where did they get this teaching from? Okay, so this is pornography. Is this pornography, or is this figuring out how to get the power of the gods? Health of the navel, marrow in the bones. Where's the power coming from? This woman is an esoteric, and she does these seminars, and she literally has hand-drawn pictures of the phallus and the woman's well, and she kind of shows how they're tied to her version of the tree of life. And she explains that at some point in the future, a man and a woman, if they can elevate their sexuality, so I'm saying get out of the carnal natural man to a spiritual form of sexuality, they can engage in sexuality and teleport without a portal. It's a pretty interesting idea. Wiki, Isha, Jesus to India. What do you think the Jesuits are doing all day when they're sitting on their asses? The root chakra is the gurus, the Kalin, the awakening, the seraph within. For some reason, they say there's 7 chakras. There's probably 140 chakras. The center of all chakras is the navel. The navel is not mentioned as one of the 7 chakras. So the first chakra is the root chakra, your anus. The second chakra is, I forget what they call it, but this is your procreative power. They don't include the navel chakra. So I'm going to include it. Then they have the solar complex chakra, which is the heart chakra. No, the solar complex, I think, is below the heart. Let's see, heart. Then they have the throat chakra. They don't have the 5 senses chakra. They have the third eye. And then they have the crown chakra. You're missing the navel. How can you have the third eye open if you don't open your other senses? So look at the temple ceremony about touching your ears, your eyes, your nose. You've got to open your senses. If you're in a spiritual domain, those senses are going to give you clues. The reason they don't focus on, and I'm sure it's one of the chakras. Like I said, they have lots of. I think there's probably 10. Did I miss one? The third eye, the crown, the throat chakra. This is your voice. So you're supposed to sit there cross-legged, which I can't do because just the way my legs are, I'm not that flexible down there. You're supposed to make this the same sign when you're doing the OK sign to make eyes. I looked out the window, what did I see? And you spread your arms out, palms up. You're like a satellite dish. You're trying to communicate with the heavens. Now, if you think about how a satellite dish works, your palms are somehow trying to focus that energy towards your third eye. It's just like your third eye is the receptor of the satellite. And Sadhguru, he goes through some things that he has. He uses the word not, which I don't like. I don't like not. You can catch that. I believe you should be saying as a mantra, I am more than this body. I am even more than this mind. So this is very similar to what he teaches in his free classes. But he wants to put not there. Sadhguru, the true guru, he has a foundation called Isha. And there's a tradition that during his life, there was a Buddhist monk named Isa who spent 16 years in India and Tibet. And he went after the monks and he said, you're being hypocrites. Is that an interesting story? And of course, he traveled by land because that's what smart people do. Rather than get on a boat and travel there, he traveled by land. Okay, they didn't have boats back then. Okay. And he tells them, I believe, I have to go back to get killed. I got to go back home and get killed. So we don't know what he was doing with his life. So Esau, yes, sir. So we know he's in Egypt for some time. For some reason, everyone says when he's 4, he returned. Why does he have to return? Maybe the 3 magi are teaching him in Alexandria. He's likely in Alexandria, the most educated center for learning on earth at the time. Okay? So maybe he's being homeschooled by the Magi in Alexandria. At the age of 12, he's presented at the temple. That sounds like a bar mitzvah. Is that a thing? You present yourself at the temple? Or maybe he was being presented at the temple because, Joseph Alexander was Joseph Arimathea was possibly a relative. Caiaphas, who later had retired, probably knew him as a boy. Maybe he worked for a time in the temple. He was a carpenter's son, but they were astonished with what he knew by the time he was 12. Luke 2:52 may have been before he was 12. He increased in stature and wisdom in favor of God and man. So one of the things I think about is the metaphors of the prophets. Joseph into Egypt. Yeshua went into Egypt. Joseph at some point was in a prison. When was Yeshua in a prison? At some point Joseph was an apprentice. Okay? I certainly believe he went to India. He paid homage to those that visited him. He returned the favor. The 3 wise men, India for sure, maybe Persia. Persia's pretty close. Maybe China, and definitely Africa. Definitely Africa. Did he travel down the Nile? To the heart of the Nubian? Of course he did. Did he travel to Britain to this tin mine with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea buys ship. He had to see this world. He can't, I don't think he can cheat. I don't think he can teleport and use his supernatural powers to get around. But he's got 18 years of travel. And it could very well be that he spent the entire time here. The true Dalai Lama. And so, a yogi, when he's sitting on his ass all day, he's working his root chakra, which means he's doing what are called Kegel exercises. He's trying to get his pituitary gland to communicate with his anus and his procreative power. And for a man, that's the neck of the body. It's below the head on the back side. And you can do this rolling motion with your pituitary gland, where you squeeze your anus and you squeeze kind of the neck of your penis. That gives a new meaning to the Russian proverb that the man is the head. The woman is the neck. And these men try to control, so when they, I don't know if it's called edge ejaculation or whatever, but when they ejaculate, they don't want it to come out of their body. They want to keep it in their body. So that means it has to go down the, what is that called? There's a seminal tract. What's the main, is it the urethra? The main tract where urine also comes out. So they want it to get into the urethra, but not leave the body. And then they think that they can absorb it to get power. And I think we currently believe there are 4 sources of the semen fluid. Yellow is not necessarily urine. 4 sources of a river next to a mountain. In the town. Is that the Garden of Eden? Anyway, there is procreative power. So according to Mark E. Peterson, is what they're doing wrong. They're using only their mind. They're not touching their phallus. So I believe the Mormon said nocturnal emissions was okay because it was just your mind. So what happens if you're awake and it's just your mind? But they wouldn't ejaculate and make a mess. They would sort of ejaculate, and then they said they could absorb it into their body and it would give them power. It was part of their purification process. So women talk about semen, we call it oil, semen, as being bitter. And then they say you gotta eat pineapple, all sorts of other things, so it tastes better. Some women say it's not bitter. Bitter versus sweet may be a function of the twin flame. Maybe there's one woman that for a man, no matter what, his oil is sweet. The idea of a twin flame. You're equal but opposite sex. Your soulmate. So in China and other places, they have matchmakers to try to connect people. There's so much going on with economics and politics and finances, but the concept of the matchmaker is present. So if we're swapping spit, different liquids, women in the kissing mouth, and from the rock. So absorbing these liquids from either party, I believe it alters your DNA. So there's all these DNA stories of twins or triplets. There were some triplets on the Dr. Oz show, and their DNA was not the same. So one, that just identifies the statistics of the PCA, which I just showed you some PCA just now, and the assumptions they're making are ridiculous. Our DNA is about 99.5% similar across all humans. So they're trying to find differences among a very small group. I don't know if they're even using dunk DNA. Okay, junk DNA. So these triplets go on the show and say we have different DNA. And my question, if I were Dr. Oz, is have you had different sexual partners? Have you had oil from a man, and these are women, but you could also have water from a woman, and you ingested it. The word of wisdom is true. It's the function of ingestion. You are what you eat. And, I'm not going to get into the details there, but when a woman is kissing a man, she's interfacing her mouth with whatever part of the man she's kissing. And so his skin or his tongue or whatever can ingest some of her essence. Her essence is her water. Similarly, the oil of a man can go in the hair, it can go into different holes, it can go on the skin. So I think of Blindside, that's her name. She's also in Speed. She apparently pays money to get the circumcised deadness of young boys to use as a beautifier on her skin. She takes the circumcised penis of boys in like Indonesia or something, and she has some sort of facial treatment that women like to do with those penises, and it keeps her looking young. Is there anything? Oh, new skin. There's Utah. They're taking the placebo. Utahns taking the placebo of newborn children. So think about placebo. Placebo is the wow of woman's water. Remember, with the flesh, blood, or water, blood, and whatever spirit we are, whatever. So some Indian tribes, I think, would eat the placenta. Some of the Native Americans in the South, what they would do when they'd cut the umbilical cord is they'd hang the umbilical cord from a tree, and if a bird would come and eat it, that was a bad omen that the child would die young. And if the bird left it alone, that means God has said this child will live a long life, a long and healthy life. You can't talk about these things. What are you talking about? This is so taboo. What do you think taboo is? So women love their makeup. They love their beautiful skin. Now, I don't know if I have to connect the dots to what Joseph was teaching. It's not marriage, it's not adultery. It's something related to some ancient Christian practices. Yeah. So I think, going back to what Joseph was doing, there's some sort of dance card-like thing. The women had complete autonomy. And then I think about, was there any man exchange? So remember their secret society of 50. These men would get into a tub with a bunch of hard alcohol. Did they leave any oil in the tub? And did they drink any of that community oil? Look at ancient Egypt. They apparently in public would go to the Nile and ejaculate into the river. I personally struggle with the man-man exchange. Would I mind if at the Linger Longer the green jello with carrots in it had been spit upon by all of the women of the Lord? All of the women of the Lord, meaning once puberty is started. Is that going to elevate my DNA to have that diversity? Okay, that one's easy now. Go the other way. Are the oils of man supposed to be shared so freely? Water into wine? It's not wine there. We always assume it's red wine. Is it white wine? Red wine I would put with the cross. Obviously there's blood involved. That isn't mud, bucko. Clay. Healing the blind. Yeah, that's clay of the earth from the potter. I don't think he spit on the dirt. Okay, read that with a dirty mind. He did the omen on the dirt. And you could really go there with the species if you put both of those together. That's pretty very interesting. The oils of man. Think about what it says in Hebrews. It says Levi is sitting in Abraham's scrotum. That's the nice way of saying in his ball sack. So do children such as Levi learn anything in a partially formed state, which is half of the DNA required for DNA? Did Levi learn in Abraham's experiences. That's if we read this way. This is the idea of possibilities. You have to try them out. Take it where you lead, and then stop and say, okay, let me think about that. And here's a more challenging question. Does Abraham get his power from his children? It's not power in the priesthood be upon me and my posterity. Power in the priesthood be upon me from my posterity. It's going to have you think about time differently. And if you think about the origin of species, the idea of DNA and whatever that means with eugenics, eugenics means good genes, diversity. Now imagine that this was somehow true, that you could ingest the procreative power of another human and it would alter and elevate your DNA. And then you have children with someone else that did that. Ancient of days, they have experience like no other. Or do they? Go back up to what I was saying. Do your children, this is my comment about Joel. Joel is the son greater than the father. And again, I'm going back to areas that the son has beginning, the father does not. But the son is the son still greater than the father? From an evolutionary point of view, maybe. Because now you have to think about what varsity spiritual procreation would look like. And if you want to get a glimpse of it, just look at the salmon of the ocean. Eggs are dropped, oil is placed over the eggs, and then they're produced. Salmon of the ocean. The salmon should be in the ocean. But now, add some sort of mixture, Gaussian mixture. Somehow those eggs and eggs become super eggs. And the oil mixes into some sort of super oil. And then it occurs. That definitely, from an evolutionary point of view, would say those offspring have all the genetic material of all generations of time and all posterities of all the inhabitants of that planet, if they all participated in this event of whatever kind. I'm going to call it the procreative tree of life. You read the Kama Sutra and some of the other stuff from India, they talk about these tree-like sexual innovations. Okay, and then again, the Kama Sutra, 300 AD. Yeshua was in India. It's 15 AD. Did he teach them? There's a funny meme on Twitter where it says, "Oh, Jesus is coming," and so all of his disciples are putting their clothes back on because They had an orgy while he was gone. Look at the idea of an orgy and the history of the orgy. In the Old Testament, it talks about making dildos out of the remnants of the temple, which would have been a bronze spoon and maybe a butter knife. And I thought they melted them down to make dildos. Maybe they were just using them like that. And then it also talks about expanding the bed to possibly have multiple participants. Okay, now for me, that's hard to imagine. That's too far. But my ancestor, Alexander Ruthven, was a chamberman of King James. And you can watch some of the, I haven't watched them, but some of these HBO specials about that, talking about kings and queens. And the chambermen and the chamber women, they would engage in helping the king and queen intercourse. Ruthven may have had homosexual, I'm not going to say that, but man-man relations with King James. I believe Ruthven was in one of these events, and he fathered Queen Anne of Denmark, first son, who mysteriously died at the age of 18. I think his name was Charles, or Henry, or something. Queen Anne of Denmark. So the Queen Consort, Henry. You got all these teenagers running around a castle. What do you think's happening? It was Henry. Mysteriously dies at 18 when he was rights to the throne. But it wasn't poisoned himself. That's the narrative. Okay. We now have DNA analysis. Open up his grave. He's buried at Queen Abbey, is he not? Or wherever they bury their nobles. Check his parentage. Queen Anne, James. And with James, it's yes or no. Check for poison in his DNA. Can you do that? I don't know. That would be interesting. George Washington was shooting blanks. What does that mean about the power of a man? I don't know. So going back to Josiah, well, let's see if we can find it. I'm going to pause. Okay, I don't think I'm going to pause. Looks like I'm fine. Turning fine gold and silver jewelry into gilded dildos, or the trouble with prudish translations. You made statues of men and worshipped them. Photographic images of them for your brothels. You made images of men, and this is the manhood of men, and you committed whoredoms with them.
So we know that the silver spoon's not good for your health. Stainless steel spoons are fine, bronze spoons are fine. It seems like in the temples they're using bronze. But this is Ezekiel 16:7. Thy hair is grown, wherein thou was naked and bare. Something about waxing, the Brazilian wax. I thoroughly washed away your blood from you, and I anointed you with oil. Which oil is that? So ironically, or not ironically, the word for oil, it looks like semen does. It's shemen. Remember right here the part about not being washed in water or swaddled or salted. I spread my skirt over thee, and I covered thy nakedness. When Yeshua lost his covering, was that his wife? No, we're supposed to get a second. Excellent ornaments. That doesn't seem like the right verse. The bud of the field. I don't know what that's referring to. Breasts, mighty, just that one character is the son, the son. Okay, I must have missed something. 16, 17. Apparently, Spencer W. Kimball didn't read this very well because he would also footnoted this one as being uninspired. Quote. So, Kimball and others, when they were dealing with things like, androgyny, which is a very rare event, but the idea of having a penis or a partial penis, I guess, and boobies is a pretty common event. More common than androgyny. It's both of them are still very uncommon. And the brethren, when you read some of the old stuff, they would have these meetings, and behind closed doors, these perverted men that didn't know anything about sex would sit there and go, should a man lick a woman's private water color? And I personally think if he wants to, he can. The liquid coming out of there is also where a bunch of blood and other stuff comes out. But it's up to the man, and the women secrete a white lubricant somehow from their body. And some women possibly can ejaculate that's not urine, that's some sort of ejaculate. So there's a water of a well. It's a knock yourself up.
Oh, and I remember reading some of this anti-Mormon stuff or this sexuality stuff years ago, and the brethren said, well, I've been on a farm before, and I've seen one female cow lick the private parts of another female cow before there was some congress with a bowl, so maybe that's okay. Thou hast also taken the fair jewels of my gold and my silver, which I have given you, and madest thyself images of men. Shalem Zakar. Shana. Yeah, I think I'm reading that scripture right. Let's see if we have some other. Yes, I've shared this before. If two men are fighting and the woman comes and yanks on his phallus, men were hung like donkeys. Yeah, the fat flesh. And whose issue was, where is that? Whose issue was like that of horses. Song of Solomon, your breasts are like roes. A man just freezes up. It's like a deer in the headlights. I think that's one of the most truism statements. Oh, look at that. Oh, so what she's doing, the blind side girl, it's been done before. She got it out of the Bible. Oh, that's the problem with the Bible. People will read it and get the master mayhem truth. So we have to hide it. And then we obviously have Lot with his children. Oh, Lot with the angels. Sodom and Gomorrah, they come to the house knocking on the door saying, hey, we heard you got some men around. And they're like, you can have the girls. No, we don't want the girls. We want these angels, these new beings in town. And it was Lot and the daughters. Both the daughters stayed with their father to preserve their mother's tree. Okay, who's that one? This looks like a copy of that. So you read all these things online about, I'm going to fight with my husband. I'm not going to win the fight, so I lift up my shirt and the fight's over. Because he just freezes up, he just locks up. Man is attracted to the curvature of women. Man is attracted to the breasts of women. To make it idolatry means you don't appreciate it for what it is. If I go look at a sunset and I say, oh, that's beautiful, is that idolatry? No. Part of our lives is sexual. A big part of our lives should be, as adults, sexual. We live in a society that they've talked so much about sex that I believe actual sexuality is probably the lowest it's ever been in the history of the world because it's so forefront. And what does that force people to do? That forces self-gratification because the world is saying everyone's having sex, and so no one's having sex. So now let's go back to the metaphor of freshman, or just the idea of line upon line. Self-gratification is the first education. If you don't know about your own body, what can you do? And along those lines, teaching this root chakra thing, you know, if a man is able to do what a guru does, which is with his mind, which is the pituitary gland apparently, ejaculate without touching the fat. This is important because this is where control will come from. The control comes from the mind.
if you don't exercise that, and also the Kegel muscles supposedly are also a thing. Let's see what they say about Kegel. I had no idea this is where today was going to go. Your pelvic floor muscles, women's health. And so for a woman, for that well to feel tighter, this is something that's suggested for women. But that's what males are doing. Advanced male Kegel training. So that's just yoga. You're awakening the setter within. Line upon line. Self-gratification. Other education. You look and watch with permission without touching. Remember the movie Fifth Element? He kisses her. Never without touching. So in the age of Skype and Zoom and long distance relationships, we've seen that happen because of the nature of the communication. You can't touch. But imagine there's a match made, and so let's imagine at the age of 12 when puberty hits, there's a match between two children. And you explain to those two children that they're going to grow up and be adults, and for the next, so they're 12 years old. So let's say for the next 6 years, you are matched. You talk to them that they may have a child, they may do this, they may do that. And then as those two children progress, and the women of the world will figure out these roles. I'm just throwing out ideas. The women would figure out these roles. And so these two children would have an era of self-discovery. To the village, as a couple, the two of them would make a commitment to the village, a public commitment, when they are going to slide into home. Which means they can play with all the bases, and by slide into home, I've defined that before, that means the phallus has oil that gets ejaculated, that gets poured into the hole of the well. And by hole of the well, I mean the hole. Not other holes. Other holes are part of going around the base of the well. This is the pinnacle. So if the phallus doesn't have oil, which means it's already been satiated, and it's still a rod of iron, it can go into the well. So this idea of pulling out as a way of contraception, that's the slippery slope. Because if you're in the well, and before you fully pull out, semen goes into the well, that means you've slid into home. But if you've pulled out and then certainly didn't have it, that happens. Or if you've ejaculated, you're spent that you're not going to have oil in the well, and you put it in the well, you could do that. But it's a slippery slope. The moment you put the phallus in the well, you've got 2 to 3 minutes. You've got 2 to 3, according to all these studies, at most. You're going to have way more than 2 to 3 minutes if this education occurs. But they make a public commitment. We're going to play around and discover. And then line upon line, you first other education, and then, you know, some mutual, what did they call this in the Mormon church? Mutual pay. And they determine the boundaries. It's not something secret and shameful. It's possible that you're at a storyteller's festival on a picnic bench doing this, or on a picnic blanket doing this. In ancient America, there are drawings of similar events where men and women are just laying out on blankets, naked as can be, and some of them are engaging in sexual activity, some of them aren't. The shame and embarrassment of sex is the wicked one. That's the wicked one. How do we remove shame and embarrassment? Line upon line. And so if you go back to the two things that I'm talking about, a bronze spoon, a man can fill his spoon with his oil and offer it as a gift. The backside of a butter knife is already pre-built dildo. The front side of the butter knife, you can offer some liquid on the knife. Some of the ancient, not so ancient Victorian age stuff is, you know, people would get hairpins stuck up in there. I remember someone from my district in my mission thought it was very important to tell me that his brother was a doctor at an ER and was pulling out Barbie dolls without their heads or with their heads, or the head got lost or something. It's all natural, but we've made it secret. We've made it the secret that we can't talk about. And so the sexual revolution came in the 1960s, and the Mormons were so afraid. In the 1990s, when Gordon became prophet, there were some studies being done about high schoolers in Utah, and he was going to use this as the cold, sober generation, that somehow the teenagers that were Mormon were better. And when it came to sexual activity, no difference. So he couldn't use that. So then he used BYU, because if you're a girl and you're well endowed and you go to the bishop and cry, you don't get kicked out, but the man gets sent home because of the policies of the university. And so the nature of the university has created this gatekeeping device, but of course you're stone cold sober. So of course the sexual activity at BYU is different. Oh, and of course if you're a football player, they just look the other way. Sexuality is the most natural thing. Why do you think 4 and 5-year-olds will touch themselves? I think mothers are the ones responsible for the actual details here, but you teach them to do it privately in their bedroom, to do it in the bathtub, to not do it too much maybe. But notice, every time you say not, it's not God. That's shame, guilt, etc. The human form for a man, the female form, is the pinnacle of God's creation. The curve of the shoulder, the curve of the knee, the buttocks, the shape of a woman being an extension of a man's back from behind. All of this is beauty. You know, the deer in headlights, the beauty of a woman's breast. Is that idolatry? It can be. You know, we talk about carnal. How can we get to spiritual sexuality? It's not this no, go thing that John Bideway explained as the Mormon way. And don't get me wrong, I don't have a good education about sexuality. I was nearly a 40-year-old virgin. But I remember when I finally decided to be active and the other partner was willing, I'm like, let's wait 6 months and play like we are in the garden. That's exactly what I wanted to do. So when I'm talking about these ideas about line upon line, I don't know where that went. Going around the bases. And that was one of the most enjoyable things I've experienced. And then I think I'm going to finish talking about this previous video that we saw where this academic said he prostitutes himself. Prostitution is the exchange of services for money or some other valued item. In the ancient Chinese, they claim there's 3 types of prostitutes. There's the child prostitute, no agency, being controlled. And so if you talk about this marriage of 2 12-year-olds, they have to be involved in that decision-making process, and they're 12. And because they're 12, they may not fully be aware of what their decisions are. That's why it has to be some temporary thing that could be absolved if those 2 are not of 20 fledged. But they still can get an education from that process. And it's not an education of shame and fear. I wonder about that because some people like the idea of engaging in sexuality with someone in the other room or something, like they could get caught. They like that thrill. But that's carnal thrill. I don't think that's not spiritual thrill. So you've got the child prostitute, then you've got the, I need to say, the normal woman. She has her agency. She chooses for an exchange. And so that could be, you don't take out the garbage, I'm not giving you what you want at night. Or that could be, oh, I want to marry him because he has money. And I have to engage in sexuality to make that happen. And then they have the green-eyed mansion. And this is tied to the Japanese form of vacation. She has her agency. She's pleasant to talk to. She's intelligent. She's not gaming you. She will or she won't. She chooses. She is the master of her own body. There's obviously the marriage contract. And so that means you've got some sort of falling under thing. That's the idea of a dance card. The place. So I'm talking about after training. There's some training. It's not the NPC, what would that be? It would be the SPC, sexual training center. So now with adults, like Joseph is teaching something. So Fanny Alger, borderline adult. I get that. But if her father knew, if her uncle knew, what are you going to do? It still might not be fully informed consent. But I'm talking about adults. So if adults went through this other training program and now they're adults, the place is the woman's bed. There's an invitation. Come to my bed. Come to my bed. It's a dance card. She invites you to the bed. Men could go out and solicit, but soliciting doesn't seem the way of agency. And women change their minds all the time. So even if you get invited to the bed, she may ask you to leave that day for whatever reasons. She may be in a bad state of the day. She may have calculated her time wrong. She shouldn't invite you to bed if she's going to have a child unless she wants to have a child. It's her calculation. That's her responsibility. Or she can put an IUD in. I say IUD. So then there just might be, she's not feeling it for whatever reason. So if she's had the education up above where she's comfortable with her own sexuality, she's comfortable with another person's sexuality, and she wants to share with you to maybe possibly find out if you are her soulmate or twin flame, or just to exchange sexual love. That's out there. What was Joseph doing? She's not feeling it. And then the idea of the Mayday pole is the woman sticks the phallus the first time in the butt. There's no coercion here. She's invited him. Think about the sealing words that Joseph Smith had at the temple. I give and I receive. So there's a clear exchange of language that when that phallus goes into that well, she's the one that put it in the first time. She's giving full permission. And then there's the state of sexuality. For me, line upon line, you do that in couples and pairs. I'm not seeing some orgy event going on. But imagine you went to some linger longer where you had these private rooms and these people went off and coupled in these private rooms. What would you describe that as? And then imagine you don't have any shame of your nakedness and everyone's sitting on the couch. They're still paired up. That looks like an orgy. But look at the history of the orgy with the woman. We have to study this history. Did they get it from the Christians? So Alexander the Great used to throw parties, so it seems like there was something going on before. After Yeshua, Nero would have virgin or strong soldier men ejaculate on his food before he ate it. And I could be going really far out there because I could be saying some things about Yeshua that are super offensive, that he would teach such things. I am trying on the hat. There is some evidence in the Old Testament, the New Testament, in what happened in the life of Joseph Smith that says we don't understand sexuality. And you cannot even tell me the creation story with the word sex in it. You have to say there's some apple on a tree or some fig on a tree. When they covered themselves with aprons, the woman covered her vagina. Is that what you're saying? She was bleeding. She didn't understand. She was a child. And the man was covering his ass. He was bleeding. The snake in the grass, what did he do? He definitely opened their eyes. So there's a true form of teaching about sexuality. And what we got on this earth because of the fall has been and always will be a false form. How do we restore it to a true form? Lehi, when he gets to America, he sees everyone running around naked. They're probably engaging in some form of monogamous and polygamous sexuality. And they have no guilt or fear or shame. And what does Nephi say? We gave up the traditions of the Jews. I'm teaching them the language, I'm teaching them about Yeshua, but I'm going native because this seems right. So I've come up with several ideas of, how the fall happened. Was Adam slapped in seconds? I don't know. And I know how we can find out. We examine the titles of pornographic videos. This tells you the disposition of the masses in regards to such things. And for some reason, they like the step action, which means it's a stepdaughter with a stepfather. It's not incestuous. It's one step away from being incestuous. So that's in the video world, and we could do that analysis. In the literary world, so remember, most people would say romance novels, which is pornography for women. So in the literary world, we could examine what I would call romance novels to get a perspective of women, to get the 50 Shades of Grey, to get an analysis of in mass, what are their thoughts. And then there's male literary porn. And it seems like in the male literary porn that I've observed, there isn't a lot of incestuous. So I don't know if there's some legal thing about videos not allowing. So it's not stepdaughter with father with stepfather. It is son with mother. It's actual son with sister, father with sister. So fecundation twins, did Eve have Cain, the seed of the serpent, and Abel, the seed of man, of Adam, as twins, two fathers? Maybe, maybe not. So that's a theory out there among evangelicals just about this. Women don't have seed. It says the seed of the serpent and the seed of you, Eve, will be separated. We always assume it's Eve's fault. Maybe it was Adam's fault. And I struggle, because if everything's a lie, you have to question everything. Woman, man comes out of a woman. It's easier for a woman to have a man, Adam, and then they become a couple. That would be a mother would then be with her son. Very incestuous. We're supposed to believe man with woman, and the end of the spine is called the coccyx. And if you read some of the early Adam and Eve stories, the apocryphal stories, there's 40 days of waiting between sex. They'd never eaten before, so they had to learn how to piss and defecate and process food in their stomach. And remember, if Adam got ripped a new one by the beast, did that mean Eve already had an anus? Or did she also get ripped a new one? Rib is not the rib cage near the heart. Many mammals have a bone in the phallus. So if you didn't need an anus, you could extend your coccyx around to your phallus. Look at some of the Egyptian phallus symbology. It doesn't look like they're doing anything to create the erection. It's like there's a bone. Then that makes you think about the phrase that God the Father has flesh and bone. What does that mean? What was Moroni doing with his robe open? I don't like the idea of flesh and bone because it's like Viagra. It's not natural attraction. You just got a bone. But the idea of taking a woman from behind and seeing the globes of her buttocks, it's like an enlarged form of your testes, her back is like the phallus, and her head is like an extension of man. So for a man to search for his true love, his soulmate, his twin flame, his missing rib, would he not want to engage in intercourse in this non-missionary form to try it out? I have not had a lot of sex in my life, very little. And I remember at some point I was going to engage in doggy style, and I thought that wasn't correct because of all this Mormon whatever going on. But I think doggy style is a way to feel each other where you're not looking at each other, but you're connecting at a higher level. Certainly face-to-face and shared breathing are very important for creating intimacy. And I believe face-to-face is how you will unlock the powers of heaven. Remember, we all have a belly button, and that is the central chakra of the 144 chakras. Is there a way where a man and a woman engaged, so the woman is on top? So remember in Arab culture, that's a man. So if the woman is on top, they relate that to a story of Lilith that is also in the Hebrew condition, that she's exerting dominion over man. And that's fine. It's the world we currently live in, the patriarchal world we live in. But if the woman was on top, and somehow there was a second connection. So the first connection is the phallus is in the eye. Well, a lot of times there's friction with the bud at the direction of the woman. but could somehow they connect navel to navel through some spiritual link? And I think that's where, I haven't listened to a lot of their stuff, but this Diana, is she still here? Yeah, this woman, when she's saying you can unlock portals, you can open stargates. So think about what navel to navel means. My navel is a connection that has been severed to a female. It's the same for the woman. So a man and a woman, we both have this severed connection to a female. And that may be the true female to female connection. That may be how you combine trees. Remember, the females are the trees of life. So it's not a female to female in the earth, it's a female to female in the spirit, which gives you a different concept of sexuality. I don't know about man to man, I really struggle with that, but what the hell was Jehovah wrestling with Jacob over? And a lot of times I think there's a PG version of it that comes across, because maybe some of these scribes were perverts when they wrote it. And maybe it could have simply been something else. But the Egyptians had the story of Set and Horus, or whoever, fighting and wrestling. And the winner stuck his penis in the anus of the loser. And you have these Catholic priests. They didn't grow up in the Catholic Church thinking, oh, I want to be a Catholic priest so I can stick my phallus in the anus of a young boy. They grew up loving God. And then as they progressed in the Catholic Church, they were given some secret book to read. And then they started sticking their phallus in the anus of a young boy. And I think it's incorrect. I think simply blowing into the anus could have the same effect. But look at what happened to Yeshua. If he was impaled on a pole, the nature of how the phallus works, he's going to have all this blood rushing to his phallus. He's going to get erect. The Romans are going to mock that. Of course that happened at the crucifixion. Why else would there be this reference to a phallus in the anus? The iron rod. Now think about that. Hold to the rod, the iron rod. Is that a euphemism? So there's so much we don't know because we're so afraid and ashamed to talk about it. And that is not correct. That is not correct. That's where the Father of Lies is winning. And that's why I had this up here. So Paul Harvey, this is one of his most famous 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
If I were the devil, if I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have 1/3 of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a servant, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington, And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions, just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want it, until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. What'll you bet? I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, that what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases for which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. Paul Harvey. Good day.
So that was Paul Harvey, 1965. That's conservatism. That's what the Mormons did in 1965. And let me be very clear. I recognize that it's easy to take everything I've just said and says, you're a spawn of the devil. You're the devil. Water boy.
Don't you remember what your mama told you about girls?
I remember, Mama.
There was someone else down at Lawson's Creek this morning.
Really?
We looked for coffees together. Her name's Vicky.
I don't ever want you associating with little girls.
Why not, Mama?
Because little girls are the devil.
Devil.
Rule 52! Rule 52!
Oh! I forbid you to talk to that enchantment. She's the devil!
She's not the devil. She's the most beautiful woman in the world.
I never said she...
The devil. So if the world is inverted, they say evil is good and good is evil. And some of what I said could easily be interpreted that way. He's saying there is no sexual sin. Is that what I said? No, I said there's a varsity form of sex, and Joseph Smith saw it. And I'm just his spokesman. He went to a tribunal and he talked his way out of it because of some spiritual message he gave them. We don't have that information. The Mormons hide it. The main message I'm saying is there are mysteries that are hidden that God said will be uncovered. Their nakedness will be exposed. I'm saying in ancient America, they had no shame. They lived in ancient America and ancient Africa, polygamous type lifestyle. In ancient India, there were multiple men with one woman. In ancient India with the Kama Sutra, there are some very interesting things going on in some of these cults in the jungle. Cults. Some of these religious practices in the jungles. And so it's easy to just say that's the devil. But the Garden of Eden and the fall of Adam was about sex. And until you can tell me that story, You can't tell me I'm good or I'm evil. You don't know. You don't know the fall of Adam's story. 100 AD, there's an apocryphal story about Joseph and Mary, and Joseph turns to Mary and he says, "Oh no, I'm just like Adam." So in 100 AD, they, at least in their mythology, still had this belief that somehow the fall was about sexuality. Oh, let's create a euphemism for the children, like the Masoretic text. Let's water it down because it's not, that's your shame and guilt talking. That's not the nature of God. So I think they have robes. I think God has a robe. But maybe he's naked. I don't know. If you appear to someone, you have to appear to someone how they're comfortable. That's the purpose of a robe, is they may not be comfortable. But if you look at, you go to a swimming location and you look at, you got the triangle of the woman's private parts, you've got the shape around her breast, the colors and all of that actually attracts your eye more to those parts than if they would just be naked. If they would just be naked, we wouldn't be staring so much. We've got all this extra bling to drive our eye to those places. If everyone was naked, we would be satiated. You wouldn't be looking all the time. If you were born in a world where everyone was naked, you would know no different. Education creates the idolatry. So where's the good education? Where's the good education? When are we going to get the true sex ed program? So look what the liberals are doing. They're trying to teach children about masturbation in like 3rd grade. Liberals. But in a society that wasn't built on control or whatever, you would be teaching children about sexuality even before then, because it would just be part of society. I'm not saying what the liberals are doing is correct. It's not correct in this world. But because to me, they represent the premature ejaculating, they're giving us clues of the future. And the clues may be inverted, but they're giving us clues. So what's a clue? There's Roe v. Wade. They're clearly there. They're telling us about children learning about sex. They're telling us about more than 2 sexes. Maybe through life iteration, maybe you go through life, you level up to level 9 as a man, and then you become a woman. How do we know that's not the case? How do we know that woman isn't the pinnacle of creation in the eternity? We don't know that. Or maybe in the eternities, you become androgynous. So anytime you go to an earth, you can choose that during that manifestation, you're going to be a man or you're going to be a woman. We don't know that. So there's climate change. The sea levels will change. So they say the sea levels are going to go down or up or whatever. You don't mess with the direction. They say you will have no possessions and you will be happy. Right? That's the New World Order. I'm pretty sure that's what the kingdom of heaven is like. You will have no possessions. You will have no contracts. Contracts are of the world. You're trapped in contracts. You will have no possessions and you will be happy. What did the Pope do? He met with all the leaders of the world, including the Mormons, except with the evangelists. The evangelists teach, to some degree, Gnosticism. Have you accepted Yeshua in your heart as the Savior and Redeemer? Yeah, that's redundant because Yeshua means Savior. I don't know his name. And someone's going to come up to me one day and say, his name is Yeshua. How do you know? Say his name. Maybe he's ashamed.
He doesn't understand that he's the one who has the power to stop it. He simply can't imagine that one little boy could be that important. Is it really me? Maybe he doesn't know what he has to do! What do I have to do? He has to give me a new name. He's already chosen it. He just has to call it out. But it's only a story. It's not real. It's only a story. Atreyu, no! Atreyu! Bastian. Why don't you do what you dreamed, Bastian? But I can't. I keep my feet on the ground. Call my name. Bastian. Please. Save us. All right. I'll do it. I'll save you. I will do what I dreamed.
So apparently his name is the Moonshine. Cats in the cradle and the silver spoon. Little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you come home, son, I don't know when, but we'll be together then, son. We'll have a good time then. 5 little ducks went out to play over the hills and far away. 5 golden rings, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves, and a partridge in a pear tree. Shalom, aloha. May God bless and keep you. May God help you to see and to be. May He enlarge your soul and enlighten your understanding, that you may gain wisdom line upon line, precept upon precept, not the wisdom and philosophies of man, but the wisdom and philology of God. May the words of God give you power, power to create, power to overcome, power to help us dissolve and melt away this facade of a world and to see ourselves and our God as He really is. May God bless you and keep you. May you accept Yeshua in your heart as your Savior and Redeemer. May you change your mind and look toward the Most High God. May you enter into the waters of baptism as a symbol that you accept that He indeed is the Most High God, that you can receive the Spirit in the baptism of fire. And then may you live as you understand a moral life. Not a Mormon life, not an evangelical life, not a Hindu life, not a Confucius life. If you want to attract to those elements, sure. Just live a moral life. Walk in godly ways.
You will make mistakes. Transgressions, are they sins?
You may want to test the boundaries of life. You may want to go satiate yourself with something new. Go and satiate yourself. Learn from it. Find out if it's good or evil in your own heart and mind. God is good. God is love. God has no shadow.
The flame of God. Can you find your true flame where you have no shadow? Your true soulmate where you have no shadow. God is good. The mercies of God are great. May God bless and keep you always and forever. May you have the power of your ancestors and the power of your children always before you. In Yeshua's name I pray. Amen.